one. Well, hey, Dave Melenda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you this week. Had to go all the way to England today in order to get a really important question answered. And so the question that I want to start with and ask you is, do you want to make better decisions? And at first I thought that's pretty darn easy question. Of course I do. Well, then I had to kind of dig down a little deeper like I tend to do. And I'm like, great, now I got to get this guy on my show because there's obviously something to this making better decisions. So I'm honored to be hanging out with Robin Hills. How are you today, sir?
I am doing great, Dave. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. You're the director of EI for Change. So fill us in on what is EI for Change.
Well, EI is emotional intelligence, and we look at change at the individual level, the level of the team, and the level of the organization. And what we're doing is looking at applying emotional intelligence in order that people can make better decisions and in order that they can build up the authentic relationships that they need in order to have a better performance.
Well, and that's a mouthful there. I mean, and it's so odd. I mean, we were talking about this before we jumped on. A lot of people really don't see where emotion connects with business or being an entrepreneur. So can you help us at your level, Robin, to fill us in on for the listener, where is that connection happen?
Okay, well, let's go back to the basic definition of emotional intelligence to help your listeners. Emotional intelligence is the way in which you combine your thinking with your feelings to make good decisions and to build up authentic relationships. That's it. Now, when we look at us as human beings, everything that we do on a day-to-day basis, a moment-by-moment basis, is driven by emotion. So if we can understand emotions better and the way in which they interact with us or the way in which we work with them as individuals to make our decisions, then we can be more effective. Now, unlike animals, which do have emotions but don't have the same ability to regulate emotions in the same way that we do, we've got cognitive intelligence. We have an awareness, we have an ability to be able to say, do you know what? I'm feeling particularly angry at the moment, but now is not the time or the place to express that anger. So I need to contain it. I need to hold it within myself. I need to work with it. I need to evaluate it and use it in a positive way. Now, it might be on certain occasions that that anger needs to be expressed quite forcefully. That's a choice that we've got. And that choice is underpinned by emotion.
So how does that then tie into business? Because I've heard people say like, don't go emotional in business. I mean, how do you, it's like it sounds impossible to separate the two, but yet people tend to not think of emotion in business. So what are some examples, Robin, of something that, people where emotional intelligence in the workplace would be an example that people can understand?
Well, as human beings, we have many, many, many emotions, and it depends upon what academic paper you read. It could be anywhere between 2,000 and 27,000 different
Wow.
emotions. So most people are familiar with a couple of dozen at the most,
Sure.
and they do tend to relate life very simplistically to these 2 or 3 dozen emotions that they're familiar with. But a lot of people really don't consider emotions in the most appropriate way. And because we're talking about polarity, through the Positive Polarity podcast, let's talk about emotions in a polar
Sure.
way. Because
Yeah.
a lot of people will talk about emotions being positive or negative emotions, and they will often cite anger as being a negative emotion. But anger is a very positive emotion if we use it to right a wrong. Now, why are we experiencing anger? It's because somebody's transgressed one of our core values. Somebody has
Mm.
gone against something that is very true or very dear to us. And what we need to do is to manage that. And if it's an ethical issue, then we can focus that anger and we can get it to make the change that needs to happen in the world. So Nelson Mandela is a great example, was an angry young man, and his anger got him into a lot of trouble. But his anger was used in a more focused way in the later parts of his life to completely revolutionize South Africa.
So then, in a business setting, do you feel like emotions are often overlooked or not dealt with properly? Is that what you're seeing?
Completely. I think a lot of people are talking about emotions and talk about emotional intelligence as a way to suppress emotions. Well, no. What we need to do with emotional intelligence is to bring these emotions to the surface and work with them. Let me give you another example, another business example.
Mhm.
Anxiety, often considered a negative emotion. Let's stop people being anxious. Again, I would say no. We want people to feel anxiety and to utilize that anxiety in the right way. And I give you a couple of examples. If somebody is going along to the board to present some bad sales figures, they're going to have a sleepless night.
Yeah.
They're going to feel anxious. Good, because that anxiety is
Yeah.
very, very useful to put them physiologically and psychologically in the right place to deal with that situation more appropriately. Now, Dave, I know you're a friendly guy. I know you've been doing loads of podcasts, and I've done loads of podcasts. But prior to coming onto your show, I was feeling anxious. And I was pleased I was feeling anxious because hopefully it means I'll be able to deliver a better interview for you.
Sure. Wow. Well, and I think again, we don't tend to separate the emotion. We try, like, I know for me, when I speak in front of a group, I don't get nervous anymore, like scared. It's more like you were talking about that anxious. You want to make sure you're doing a great job. You want to make sure that you give your best to the audience. So in the day-to-day activities, is it seems important to be able to identify the emotion first. Is that kind of where you start in emotional intelligence?
Yes, in a very simplistic way, that is a good way to start. What am I feeling at the moment? Can I put a
Right.
label on it? I
Okay.
would say a more sophisticated way of looking at it is what data am I receiving from the way that I'm feeling? Because that data is information that I can apply my intelligence to. Now, like I say, that's a lot more sophisticated, but I think in the
Sure.
first instance is, how am I feeling at the moment? And take it down to an even simpler level. Is the feeling pleasant or unpleasant? And am I
Okay.
going to use this feeling constructively, or am I going to use it to be destructive? And these are all choices.
Wow. So what if you don't know? I mean, if someone's listening right now and they are like searching themselves, Robin, and they're like, I don't know what I'm feeling, or I don't know what to label that, because like you said, whether there's eight emotions or 12 or 20,000, I mean, it can get complicated pretty
Can.
quick,
It
right?
can.
So how does the average entrepreneur listening, what do you, like you said, do I like it or don't I? I like that as a simple start, but is it important to be able to label I'm angry or sad or joyful, or is it important to put an actual label on what you're feeling?
If you can do it, great. If you can't do it, does the feeling feel good or does the feeling feel not so good? Is it pleasant
Okay.
or unpleasant? And
Okay.
that's the easiest way to look at it. I am feeling unpleasant at the moment. Well, I'm not, but I'm feeling unpleasant at the moment.
Sure.
Uh, what's driving me to feel unpleasant at the moment?
Okay.
Can I understand why I'm feeling that level of unpleasantness? What do I need to do, either to work with it or get rid of that feeling, to convert that feeling into something I can live with better, something more pleasant? Do I need to go and have a break? Do I need to go for a walk? Do I need to have an intense conversation with this person that I'm engaged with to uncover some things that really we're trying to not go there and talk about? So utilize your emotions in a positive way to drive you in terms of the decisions that you need to make. And just to go back and re-emphasize and re-summarize for everybody, how are you feeling at the moment? Is it pleasant or unpleasant? What's driving that feeling? And what are you going to do with it?
So I want to get really practical on this one, Robin. So let's say someone's listening and they say, okay, I'm not feeling, I don't like the feeling because I didn't hit my sales numbers this month, or I don't like the feeling I have because I have to let somebody on my team go. If there's something that they're able to identify that's causing that, what's kind of the next step in that process then?
Well, it's actually doing what is an appropriate set of actions in order to rectify the situation. So if I have not hit my sales targets and I'm not feeling particularly good about it, what am I going to do about it? I can either complain to everybody, make me feel good. It can be quite cathartic, but ultimately it's not going to change the situation. Or I can go back and say, right, let's review the last half a dozen or so sales calls and look at what I did, look at what went well, and look at what I could do to improve it. Is it because I'm not handling the objections particularly well? Is it because I'm not asking for the business? Is it because I don't know certain elements of the product and the benefits that they can portray? So that is one way of positively using that unpleasantness around sales targets. It's just one way. Your listeners will come up with better ways. And if
Sure.
somebody is having to let a member of their team go, recognize that you're not going to feel very pleasant about it, but recognize that in order to do it as ethically and as morally and as well as you possibly can, you've got to
Hmm.
prepare for it.
Sure.
And through that preparation, it will give you the confidence to be able to manage that level of unpleasantness and deliver the bad news, even though you don't want to.
So labeling it feels like the self-awareness piece is really important, like to be very aware of this. And the more that you can go down that path of good or bad, or pleasant or unpleasant, and then try to, sit with it for a little bit, it feels like the outcome is going to be better because you're looking at your emotions in a different way. I mean, I'm just trying to put it in words for somebody that's
Good.
never thought of
Yeah.
this before. So,
Yes, you're looking at emotions as providing you with data. Why are we experiencing emotions? They are psychologically and physiologically responses to the situation or the environment that we find ourselves in. So it's putting our mind and body in the right place in order to keep ourselves safe and to work within the environment. Now, a lot of our thoughts might drive emotions as well, but it's actually recognizing that these emotions contain data and applying intellect to that data and utilizing the emotion and the information within that emotion to a great outcome.
so I want to turn the corner for a second because let's say somebody is now aware that they have to kind of involve a team. They have to share this in a team setting. We do work with emotional intelligence, and we tend to tell people that this is your EQ is a pretty private score. It's something that you don't necessarily want to share with people unless you feel comfortable. I'm just trying to understand how does this work on a team? Because now we're talking about different levels of emotional intelligence. Some people may have more emotional intelligence than others. So how does that work in a team without it feels like it could be really damaging to a team?
It can be, but more often than not, it's a lot more positive than people think, because emotional intelligence starts with self. And as you rightly said, Dave, it is self-awareness. So it's having that awareness of yourself, having an awareness of your strengths, your limitations, having an awareness of your emotions and the impact that they have upon you, and then being able to regulate them, to control them, to manage them, to work with them in a very, very positive way that you feel comfortable with and sits with your ethics and your morals. Now, that's great if you live on your own and you're a hermit and you live out in the countryside with nobody
Yeah.
else around you. But as
Yep.
human beings, we're social beings. So the next part of emotional intelligence is engaging with other people in the outer world. And
Okay.
the core component here is empathy. And empathy is the way in which you perceive the thoughts and feelings of other people. So within a team, it's vitally important to understand how the team is feeling. As a leader of a team, you're responsible for the emotional climate within the team. If you're angry, the team will pick up on that anger, and they will not work at their best because they will be behaving around that anger. So if you want your team to be contented and you want your team to perform at their best and you want them to feel bursts of happiness and joy because they enjoy working for you, what is it that you're going to do to create that emotional climate? Because in that climate, people really are performing at their best. And so, as a leader, you utilize your understanding through empathy, the awareness that you've got, to utilize your social skills to engage with people to improve your own performance and the performance of others.
It's funny because I think about back in the 70s when my dad was in the workforce, and empathy was not really a word that was used very much. I mean, right? Is it so in England, is that been a longer term word being used, or is that newer like it is for us here in the US?
It's new for everybody. I think we've just become a lot more aware of the importance of empathy over the last few years. And I think it will become even more important in the workplace, not less important, with the advance of artificial intelligence.
Well, that's I mean, it's such a weird word because it seems to be counterproductive to an entrepreneur because we're fighting all the time, right? We're fighting competition. Sometimes we're fighting the clients. I mean, there's like a struggle there in our business, but yet we're supposed to be empathetic. So when we come back from the break, Robin, I want to kind of unpack your journey on this and see how you got into this because I love hearing about these stories around the world. So we'll be right back. Awesome. I'm honored to be hanging out with Robin Hills, Director of EI for Change. And so you are in this space so deep. And I'm just curious, Robin, how did this come about for you? Was there an epiphany for you? How did you get exposed to this emotional intelligence and then turn it into a career?
Well, interestingly enough, Dave, I started my career at the beginning of the 80s. That's last century. And what I was doing, I was selling pharmaceuticals in and around London. And I was selling in the London teaching hospitals. And I noticed at the time that there were certain doctors that I could engage with, and they were brilliant. We had really good in-depth conversations. I was able to help them and support them in the way in which they were managing and treating their patients clinically. I was able to really influence them, and they were able to help and support me in terms of developing my career. And there were some doctors who I would go along and talk with, and they hadn't even got the time of day for me. They would treat me like something that had arisen at the bottom of their shoe as they'd been walking across the field. And
Sure.
that was not pleasant. And I didn't know why this was. And the reason why I didn't know why it was because it wasn't until 15 years later when Daniel Goldman, or 25 years later, when Daniel Goldman published his books that brought emotional intelligence into the public consciousness, that I realized that that was the element that was underpinning all of these relationships. Now, that's a very simplistic way of looking at it,
Sure.
but that's part of my story and part of my journey. I moved up to the northwest of England to take up a leadership role. And through a number of changes, I was let go on a couple of occasions. Through no fault of my own, the company just restructured and my role wasn't needed anymore. Now, I
Sure.
actually had to make the most of that. And so I recognized that I'd really got this ability to work with people and to help people to grow and to develop and to utilize emotional intelligence as a tool in order to do that. So I set my business up just around the time of the financial crash in 2007, 2008. Not the best time to start up a
Sure.
business, but of course that presented me with major challenges. And from that point onwards, I have developed a business around growing and developing people, underpinned with and focusing in on and specializing in emotional intelligence.
Wow, that's great. When you first are exposed, when somebody, I should say, is first exposed to this, are they resistant to this? Is it sound foreign to them? Or is it like, wow, I've been looking for this my whole life? I mean, what are you seeing when you start communicating with people about emotional intelligence?
I see all of those.
Okay.
I see all of those. I think the interesting thing is just before the 2020s, Forbes did one of their analyses on what was going to be successful, the skills that were leaders needed in order to be successful in the 2020s. There
Hmm.
was creativity, there was adaptability, there was persuasiveness, and there was something else. But within those skills, another one that was highlighted was emotional intelligence.
Okay.
And I had a look at it and I thought, yeah, all right, we can be a bit picky here, and I need to be picky because all of those other skills don't work unless you've got emotional intelligence. So why are you actually separating emotional intelligence out as a set of skills
Sure.
when really adaptability, creativity, persuasiveness, communication skills, whatever it is that you're looking at, require emotional intelligence for you to be successful in utilizing those skills. Now,
Mm.
straight after that, we went into the pandemic and we all went into lockdown and we all came out, and they've just recently redone the survey, and emotional intelligence is right at the top there. So more and more people are now aware of emotional intelligence. So rather than going into people and having to say, well, you know, here's a term that you've never heard of before, or they will then reflect back to be, well, I've never heard of that before. Everybody's now heard of it. And everybody
Sure.
asks all the really good critical questions that you've been asking me. Great. How do we apply it to business? What's the point of it?
Yeah.
Where can we use it? Why
Yeah.
should we take it seriously? All those really great questions.
Wow, that's awesome. And Daniel Goldman in his book talked about the difference between low EQ, which is how he measured the emotional intelligence, was the emotional quotient. Between low EQ and high EQ, he said there was like a $29,000 per year difference in salary. And
Yeah,
so I'm just
yeah.
curious, what's your research been and what's your experience been in that situation? Low EQ or low EI versus high EI? What things have you seen?
I've not quantified it in the same way that Daniel Goldman has. I you know, take my hat off to him. He's done some wonderful research, and there are some great organizations out in the big wide world, such as 6 Seconds, that do some phenomenal research on EQ in the workplace. EQ being the measure of emotional intelligence,
Sure,
emotional
sure.
quotient, as you rightly said. Um, but all I can do is say that everything that Daniel Goleman has said that you have just reiterated seems to hold true in the work environment. So if people can really focus in on improving their emotional intelligence, it will hit them where it needs to hit them, and that's in the pay packet. But it will hit them positively in the pay packet because it will put more money in there for them. Why?
Oh,
Because they're a better all-round human being.
and that's the thing that's so hard for some people, because all that I've been hearing today, Robin, is slow down and take some inventory and think about, there it just we're not built as entrepreneurs to slow down. And I think I'm curious, do you run into that where people are like, I don't have time for this? I don't see this, I mean, as important. Are there still people out there that share that feeling, Robin?
Yes, there are. And I have to say to people, look, you've got to look after yourself. You've got to look after yourself as a human being, because if you don't look after yourself, nobody else is going to do it for you. And I'm going to use some very straightforward biological examples here, Dave. We all need to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
We all need to go to sleep and have rest. So we need to factor that into the day. We need to have some me time, some time to go and refresh ourselves mentally. And it might be reading a book, it might be watching the television, it might be going out with friends, it might be going for a drive, it might be taking some activity like going to the gym. It's whatever it is that you need to refresh yourself. You've got to build that into your day. You've got to stop smoking. You've got to stop drinking. You've got to drink more healthily. So rather than stop drinking altogether, the odd little bit
Mm-hmm.
of alcohol here or there has been shown through research to be very beneficial, but in
Sure,
moderation. Nobody
sure,
else can eat that sandwich for you. Nobody else can drink that coffee for you. You can't delegate it.
sure.
Nobody
Yeah,
else, nobody else can go to the toilet for you. Just
sure. Yeah.
grab the moments that you can to refresh yourself and get the nourishment that you need mentally and physically.
But that's like, and this is so hard because, and I empathize with people listening, because I, in my career, have done this where, you talk about working out, refresh yourself, and sleep. I'm guessing for a lot of people listening right now, Robin, those are like the first three things to go when the pressure's on from a schedule perspective, right? Hey, I can skip a meal if I sleep 4 hours rather than six, or whatever your numbers are. If I skip my workout today, I'll walk extra fast to the bathroom to 3 times or whatever. There's a lot of justification. There's a lot of that going on. And it doesn't feel like we're taking that really serious. And so do low emotionally intelligent people tend to skate on that stuff? Is that, not taking care of myself, is that kind of equal a low or a low emotional intelligence?
That's one way of looking at it. That is one way of looking at it. Let me spin it a different way. Again, because we're on the positive polarity podcast, I want to look at it from a polar opposite.
Sure.
Because am I emotionally intelligent? Interesting question. If I answer no, what am I doing in the field of emotional intelligence? If I answer yes, it's rather arrogant and self-conceited and suggests there's no room for improvement. It depends. There are certain times when I go into a situation and I'm faced with difficult choices, and I make good choices and I build up relationships and people feel good about it and I feel good about it. And I've used my emotional intelligence well. That's when
Mhm.
I've got high emotional intelligence. Now, going back to what we've been talking about, I know that I'm not as emotionally intelligent when I'm tired, when I'm hungry, when I'm thirsty, when I'm stressed, and I need to know what it is that gets me into that state, because by ensuring that I know that information, I can deal with it and manage it. And if I'm in a situation where I need to make a decision with people, I can actually put my hands up show a level of vulnerability and say, look, I'm not feeling in 100% at the moment to be able to make this decision. I don't want to make a wrong decision, but if you're forcing me to make a decision, allow me the opportunity to come back, change it, and apologize. So put yourself in control and manage yourself and manage the situation. Yes, it all takes time, but we want to make the best decision, not just a quick, impetuous decision, the best decision. And sometimes we have what's known as Hobson's choice. Any decision is going to be a wrong decision. But we need to determine what the worst decision is and what the best out of those bad decisions are, and go with it.
Well, and I'm learning too in my life, Robin, that not making a decision is still a decision. So thinking that you're able to just push it down the road, not make that critical decision that needs to be made, you feel like you're buying yourself some time. I mean, that's your decision. And so, you know, as we're talking about today, ways to make better decisions, do you think not making a decision is still a decision? Are you on board
It
with that
is.
one?
Yeah, very much so. And I would rather not make a decision than make the wrong one.
Right? Yep. No, absolutely. You brought something up that I want to circle back to as we start to land the plane today. You talked about I wrote down the word triggers. You know, what are some things that trigger that emotion? You know, we tend to know for alcoholics, they're probably not well suited to go sit in a bar. Or somebody that's struggling with a gambling addiction, probably not a good idea to go to the casino. I mean, into business, what are some business triggers or what are some emotional triggers when you were talking about that? What are some things that you've noticed that can trigger these negative emotions in people?
First of all, it's not a negative emotion. It's just an emotion, a reaction. It's
Okay.
something
Yep.
that has
You're right.
triggered
Yep.
an intensity of emotion that you've then got to say to yourself, I'm at risk of destructive behaviors here. It's very easy to say, but if somebody has pressed that button, off you go.
Right.
Just remember, Aristotle said, anyone can become angry. That's easy. But to be angry for the right purpose, with the right person at the right time and in the right way, that's not easy.
Wow.
So I think what we've got to do is to recognize our hot buttons. One of the core exercises that I run in an introduction to emotional intelligence workshop is to help people to identify what their emotional triggers are. And it's a very simple exercise. It's getting somebody else to ask you the questions. What is it that annoys you? What is it that irritates you? What is it that offends you? What is it that you wish people wouldn't do? What is it that you wish people would stop doing? Now, if you answer those questions, that will give you some insights into what it is that triggers your intense, unpleasant emotion that could lead to destructive behaviors.
And is that hard I mean, that seems like that would take some self-reflection. That would take some time. That would take some kind of really thought. Or are a lot of people just quick to say, hey, if I could just get this to stop X, what are your thoughts there?
My thoughts there, Dave, are that this exercise needs to be managed incredibly well, because if you give people the questions or the statements on a piece of paper and say to them, go away and think about it, they'll come up with smart answers. They'll think it through. They'll come up with the answers that they wanted to come up with. So what I do is I separate the group out into pairs. And I get each pair to interview each other. A interviews B, and B writes down A's answers without comment, without judgment, as the answer is said. Now, when you're being interviewed with these questions, it's much more of a gut reaction. It's much more from the heart. It's much more You're not necessarily thinking about it. It's much more of a reactive answer, which is what we're wanting. And
Sure.
then we've had B interviewing A interviews B, so they just reverse and they do exactly
Sure.
the same thing. And then at the end of the exercise, they sit down and they look at their answers and they work through it and they do some sort of analysis on the answers and they decide between the two of them through coaching and through helping and supporting each other what those hot triggers are. And I found that this exercise, very, very simple to explain, very simple to do, but it does take time. But the outcomes are incredibly powerful.
Wow, that's so cool. And as again, a couple more questions for you, and I'm gonna let you go. Do you actually, and so for someone listening that isn't sure if their emotional intelligence is high or low, do you use an assessment, or how would the average listener determine if they have high emotional intelligence or low emotional intelligence?
The emotional intelligence assessment that I'm qualified in using was developed by an Israeli psychologist called Reuben Bar-On at the turn of the century. It's called the EQI 2.0 assessment, and it measures 15 facets of emotional intelligence. And it compares the results to other leaders working in other industries. So
Okay.
we'll look at things like self-expression, it will look at emotional management, emotional regulation, it'll look at stress tolerance, it'll look at empathy, it'll look at flexibility, and it'll give a measure on all of these facets. And it gives people some insights as to how they're utilizing their emotional intelligence. But as you know, Dave, with any good assessment, it's the way in which the person interprets it for themselves and how they use and apply this information and what difference it's going to make for them as an entrepreneur or a leader. And that's really where the facilitative coaching elements of being able to help somebody with the insights around their results really works and really helps.
And you have a global community with over 400,000 people in over 200 countries. So is the listener today able to jump into that community if they wanted to do that? How would they do that, Robin?
Oh, by all means, I have a free book that is available for your listeners called Develop Your Emotional Intelligence. But most of my work is now done by teaching emotional intelligence principles online. And for
Okay.
your listeners also, I have a free course, a free online course, which is working with mindfulness. Now, the reason why I've called it that is it's applying mindfulness in the workplace. So it's bringing mindfulness as a fundamental part of emotional intelligence into the workplace in order that you can make better decisions and build up authentic relationships.
Wow, better decisions and authentic relationships. If that is not interesting to you, and if that's not on your radar, hopefully the time here with Robin has at least sparked your interest there. One last question, Robin, I'm gonna let you go. What would your tip of the day be? Maybe it's something we've covered. Maybe there's something on your heart for somebody right now that's listening. What would you share with somebody as a tip of the day?
Learn to develop your empathy because that is something that the robots and the machines with artificial intelligence will never be able to do.
You had to use the empathy word. You couldn't tell me to read a book or you couldn't tell me to take an assessment, huh?
No,
That's
go
hard.
away. Go. That's hard. That's no. It's not. That is easy.
Yeah.
Go away and learn to be more empathetic. See the world through other people's eyes. Feel their feelings. Help them to understand that there is a different way of seeing the world out there.
That's awesome. So if somebody is interested, Robin, in learning more about you, connecting with you, maybe learning more about EI for change, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Well, probably the best and easiest way is to go through the business networking site, which is LinkedIn. Everybody seems to be using it who is
Yep.
somebody in the business world. Or go to my website, which is ei4change.com. EI number 4change.com.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Robin, for this. Again, if you're listening, our goal each week is to bring some really solid content. And I'm hoping that something that Robin shared with you today is kind of just sticking in your craw. And rather than just jump into your next podcast or jump into your next activity, I just want to challenge you to take a minute and just let it sit. Let it sit and sink in. If you're confused about something, please reach out to Robin. He's accessible on LinkedIn. It's Robin Hills, Hills, coming to us all the way from England. Thank you so much for hanging out. And I just love learning about this and can't wait to keep learning from you. And thanks for all that you're doing.
Thank you, Dave, for all that you're doing.